Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're calling in from.
Hello.
Okay, so welcome to this session on economic growth, resilience. So we're going to get started. We have with us speakers coming from various backgrounds. So I'm going to start by introducing Regina Cornish, who is the Mexican Youth Action Hub focal point. Regina works as policy officer at the British High Commission in Mexico, and she's done a lot of work on the SDGs and programming. And Regina has also been working for the Mexican representation to the WTO and UNCTAD. Is that correct, Regina? If that's the case, just say hello to everyone with a wave of your hand.
Hi, yes, I'm Regina, and I'm curious before we begin if there's a way we can record the session and maybe also give a couple minutes since I think there's only 7 participants due to the breakout rooms way.
All right.
But I'm not sure if that's okay.
So do you suggest we give a couple of minutes then?
I suggest we give it like 2-3 minutes. I only see 7 participants, so I'm not sure if there's more people, and also if there's a chance we can record the session.
Okay, let's give it a few minutes. UNCTAD is very strict with timing, so they prefer we going straight, but let's give it a few minutes for some people to jump in. Okay, I think 2 minutes have elapsed. The numbers don't seem to be adding up. So perhaps we proceed, if you don't mind. Okay, so after presenting Regina, I think the next person in line to be presented is Saad Jemot. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, please. So Saad, Shadi. Yeah. Shadi. Okay, I'm gonna get used to it. So Shadi is an attorney at law and a business consultant with over 10 years of experience advising micro enterprises, small and medium-sized enterprises on various legal matters and the commercial strategy and business development. And she's worked with international agencies such as UNDP and UN Women in facilitating the creation of various capacity building resources online. So Saad Shadi was also appointed by the government of Barbados to oversee a consultative policy development and implementation process in her capacity as committee. Sorry, I was interrupted there. I said So you, Shade, you were appointed as well by the government of Barbados to oversee a consultative policy development and implementation process in your committee focal person. So Shade, can you please just wave a hand of hello to everyone? Your microphone is closed.
Sorry, hi everybody.
Hi Shade. Okay, next in line is Christoph Ferguson, 27-year-old creative entrepreneur who set up so many companies, co-founder of UCA Limited. I guess you're going to tell us what that is exactly and bring out your experience on board. Recently, you've also created some companies such as Christensen Nunes and Co. and Lavender Calf LLC, which is a baby-centric family brand. You have a wealth of experience and talent in terms of partnership, and your work cuts across many fields such as artificial intelligence, career consultancy, education, finance, coaching, job development, marketing, etc. Hi, Christoph Ferguson. Can you say hello to everyone with a wave of the hand?
Well, definitely. Hello, everybody. A little nervous, but nonetheless, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. So, yeah, I look forward to the conversation and discussions.
Right. Thank you very much. I think we're all a little bit nervous when very inspiring people get to meet together. You know, there's a lot of spark and energy coming on. I think we're going to get there. Finally, last but definitely not the least, to join our team for this talk is no other than Wendella Rang. Is Wendella online?
Yes, I am here.
Oh, great. So Wendella is a former intern, economic affairs intern at UNCTAD in New York. You've been invited to contribute to a book on SDG number 8, which is decent work and economic growth, which makes you perfectly fit for this particular session. And this is an initiative that really spans from the International Association of Universities. And you're contributing to research, academia in achieving the SDGs as a whole. You have a BA in politics and philosophy from the School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London, and you reside in Stockholm in Sweden. Is that correct? And can you say hello to everyone?
Hello, everyone, and that would be absolutely correct.
All right, so without much ado, I think we're going to move into the questions. And you had the questions already online before, so I hope your answers are ready. So who's going to go in first then? Who's ready to tackle on the first question? Christoph seems to be laughing. Maybe you want to go on first then.
No. I was saying Sade can go. Sade can go, man.
Shade can go in first. Okay. Shade, please, can you go on then?
My understanding now was that Regina was going first.
Okay.
As you wish, Sade, I don't mind. You can go first if you like.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please, Shade.
I'm happy for you, Regina, to go ahead.
Okay.
Okay,
Everyone seems to be a little bit shy.
No, it's okay. I can start. So,
okay.
I guess one of the questions, or I don't know if you have a question for me, Aris, if not, I can answer.
Okay. So do you prefer for me to ask the question? So let me ask the question very clearly. So Shade, considering your work in Barbados at the National Youth Policy Coordination Committee, what would you advise governments to seriously consider when developing policies for economic growth that are youth inclusive? And how can we make sure that policies are truly inclusive? Is there a recipe?
I think, in a word, my advice would be to just listen. I think young people are typically very clear and consistent when it comes to articulating what they want in relation to economic opportunities. And if I'm to go by my own experience, our consultative and participatory policy development process here in Barbados has certainly demonstrated that. So based on my experience, I would advise governments to seriously consider creating as many opportunities as possible for young people, both mainstream and marginalized youth, to sit at the table and guide the process at every single stage. In our case, we didn't just do desk research and focus groups and surveys. We went into the communities, even in the height of a pandemic, and we sought out young people on their social media platforms, such as Twitter, and facilitated really meaningful engagement. And I think it's also mission critical to capitalize on the digital transformation that has been demanded by the current global pandemic. And likewise, it's also important to empower as many people as possible to earn and to be productive. So in practice, that looks like creating enabling environments and support systems for persons who are outside of the mainstream. So for the disabled, for working mothers and other caregivers, for marginalized communities, and creating safe spaces for persons like, the LGBTQIA community, so that they can earn and work safely. So I think my answer to that question is that, at this point, we have a moral obligation to do things differently, but with rights come responsibilities, so youth have to do their part as well.
All right, Shadi, thank you very much. Very interesting answer there. We can't really stress it enough. This moral responsibility to create an enabling environment that gives everyone an opportunity, especially the left behind. Now we're going to move on to Regina in that order, if you don't mind. So Regina, the question is straightforward. What would you say are the top 3 priorities that should be put in place for youth inclusive economic growth? And can new technologies play a role? And if so, how?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So I think there's 3 main ways, as you mentioned, to promote youth inclusive economic growth. And the first one would be to specifically focus on inclusive and transversal public policies. So what does this mean? When you create a public policy, it means you're taking into consideration diverse groups of people, including, of course, the youth. Why are the youth relevant? This is seen very relevant since we are the leading future. I think all the youth populations have a lot more to say than what is actually usually allowed to do. What does this mean? We need to allow them to sit at the table. So it's very important for youth populations to be in the legislative agenda and within the public policy. The second one is to have a gender focus. So all the policies that you create need to have youth at the table and gender focus. Why? Because more than 50% of the population is women, and as we have learned and statistics have showed us, is that when you involve women, it is super important to remember that they're the ones who can carry the family forward, they're the ones who can educate their children, among other topics, but it's super important to have gender within them. The third one, it needs to be a climate focus. So we no longer have 1.6 worlds, we only have one. And currently how the resources we're currently using, we don't have enough. So it's super important to have climate and sustainability within our agenda. So basically the first point is to have public policy that's super transversal when it comes to inclusivity with the youth, gender, climate, and sustainability. The second point would be to have financial inclusion. So what does financial inclusion actually mean? It means that everybody has access to products and services that helps them to have better credit opportunities, better saving opportunities, among other different financial aspects. And to this, I believe it's important to incorporate the technological aspect. So fintech currently is a way that we can address other vulnerable populations to be more inclusive within the financial scope. And it's important to have financial inclusion because through credit and other financial elements, people can be entrepreneurs, they can start investing, and that's a way to generate money. And considering my first point, we can continue to like a green capitalism, where it means that all the new businesses used with this inclusive and this credit will be sustainable. And lastly, we need education. As always, education is super holistic, both when it comes to hard and soft skills. Hard skills being the ones related to math, reading, writing, but also soft skills. Something that we've realized in this new generation is that there is a need for emotional intelligence. So we haven't seen that much emotional intelligence being tackled at schools, and this is a new ongoing topic that needs to be addressed, and as well as sex education. If we have both of these, we will include and create a more inclusive and economic growth, because one, it would help to reduce poverty, and people will know how to holistically incorporate it into a society. So basically, those are the 3 points: inclusive public policy, financial inclusion, and education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Regina. Very, very good points coming out from your answers, especially on climate. There's no planet B. So we have just a planet A, and we have to do everything to make sure this planet is good enough for us. Youth inclusiveness at policy level, gender equality, fintech, to bring along those who've been left behind. I think these are very...
You're on mute.
Sorry. So I think Shade is bringing to my attention that I started with the specific questions, whereas we should have had general observations first. So it's no big deal. Let's deal with the specific questions, and then let's come back to general observations on the topic, if you don't mind. Sorry about that. So the next specific question goes to Christoph Ferguson, who was trying to escape from the questions first. I'm joking.
No.
I'm joking. So Christoph Ferguson, you know the question very well. Let's go deep into it. In your view, and as an entrepreneur, what kind of incentives should be created for young entrepreneurs to make their business thrive? Have you benefited from training? And if so, what do you consider important in apprenticeship and training programs?
Okay, sure. So I can start with my story. So I started with demand that I was thinking, hey, I needed a job, or I needed some form of income right after school. That uncertainty led me to be innovative and creative. At the time was, how can I get myself, employed? So the first thing I thought of was, hey, I could be a brand ambassador for some corporate brand on campus. Maybe give up free samples of some products, maybe do some customer research, or just show representation for their brand at different events. And that took off, meaning that I was a brand ambassador for Heineken here in Jamaica, and other students saw it and said, hey, how can I be a part of this? And I created a whole company around it. I got students employed, I got them trained, I got them resume worthy in the job space. I got them mentored, and I realized that, hey, this could really mean a business. So it really just me following my muse, to be honest. Nothing was planned, nothing was structured. I was just going with the punches, I go with momentum. But incentives that really led me to continue doing it was the different competitions or pitch competitions, the different accelerator programs I was a part of, or the mentorship programs I was a part of, but also the capacity building of, I would say, the entrepreneurship network, meaning that I found that all the entrepreneurs are willing to just help me. They gave me resources, they gave me equipment, they let me use their office if needed. And I think that type of incentive can really fast track a young entrepreneur. Having a community of young entrepreneurs to build on each other, to help each other, to collaborate with each other, and then build on the innovation of each other creates more productivity in society. And then the different training programs are so vast. I've been a part of virtual ones, I've been a part of face-to-face ones. I've been a part of a study tour one in Silicon Valley in California, where I got to visit the Google office and the different tech offices, and just to kind of know how a tech ecosystem works. So hopefully I could bring that back to the Caribbean. And that was a program sponsored by a company here in Jamaica. So the level of exposure that gave me from a first world country and say, hey, we can also adapt our culture with their technology here is, it shows possibility. So for us, it really brings your ideas to light. It brings the focus, but also brings a space of, fine-tuning it. So the incentive for you as a young entrepreneur is really say, hey, you have these pillars of foundation to support you on your journey, whether maybe finance and maybe through mental health, because the entrepreneurship journey is very lonely sometimes. And having a community, a camaraderie of people to support you in this journey helps with the mental health. Maybe in the case of supporting on your lifestyle, maybe you're just doing this to say, hey, I want to start a business to also be close to family, you know, depending on your lifestyle, depending on your income bracket, but also your creativity. So different training programs are across the board. There's some locally, there's some regionally, but at the end of the day, it's really on the onus of you to take most of the material and make it matters to you, and then bring it back home and say, hey, how can I now run with this to make some form of productivity or profit or, you know, impact in society? So yeah, I think that's my sense of answering the question.
All right, thank you very much, Christopher. So that's a really brilliant answer. I think you really touched the point in terms of the lifestyle of an entrepreneur. It can be a very lonely road. So having a community around, we can't stress enough the importance of community networking and all the transmission of knowledge, the wealth of knowledge, which no education can give you, to be honest. You can only learn that in a community. And I've been around spaces in London as well, Google Campus you talked about, all these accelerator programs that are just fantastic, and no academic degree can offer that to you. So I can't agree with you more. It's really, really, really pertinent what you said. So great, last but not the least, we're going to move to Wendela with the question. You have been an intern at the United Nations in New York, and Secretary General Guterres launched the report, Our Common Agenda. How do you see the role of youth in an inclusive economy? And talking about ways on how to implement plans, what is the role of financing for development? Over to you.
Thank you so much, moderator. It's an honor to be here with my fellow panelists. So as the session focuses on how to build next generation economies that benefit everyone, including, or in this particular case, for youth, I don't wish to speak from my own perspective and what I think or what I recommend, but instead I want to focus my intervention here on what a greater collective of youth want when it comes to building the economies of the future, because that is what our discussion today is about. How do we facilitate a greater good, in this case, greater economic inclusion and prosperity for more young people than currently is the case? So back in April, UNCTAD consulted young change makers and youth of the general public from all corners of the world during the pre-events to the ECOSOC Youth Forum on SDG 1, which is no poverty, and SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth. So together, throughout the space of a few days, youths of all ages and backgrounds came together to discuss and identify what unique challenges face youth with regards to employment, economic empowerment, and in many cases, pure economic survival, and what are the solutions at hand. And the message was loud and clear. Youths want a new global deal, which rejuvenates and redesigns the parameters for youth employment based on sustainable economic solutions that are fueled by creative entrepreneurship and public economic policy that's underpinned by inclusivity. And the main suggestions by youth for how to achieve this were that curriculums in educational systems are reformed to better align with the needs of the job market, and seeing that there's quite a big gap there. For example, there's an increasing need of technology-centered entrepreneurship, and also that SDG awareness is taught in schools. Youth also wanted to see more entry-level jobs with easier entry-level requirements across sectors to ensure that students can get a job during and after completing school, but also so that those who do not pursue higher education can get a job without being very well connected. And of course, traineeships and internships must be paid, especially since only a small fraction can otherwise afford to excel professionally. And SDG-aligned business models must also be incentivized, especially for young entrepreneurs and startups. And public and private investment must target green, blue, creative, and circular economic models. Finally, youth want to see more awareness raising campaigns on climate change, especially in developing regions, and suggested creating an SDG awareness framework that is tailored to the unique context of developing countries to help local communities realize the urgency of the climate crisis, and also to better mitigate and adapt to the issues that are brought on by such. And additionally, of course, it's so important also that public and private policymakers
find solutions so that the digital gap can be bridged, and to enable youth, especially in developing countries, to harness the benefits of the digital economy and to access information and education online, which they have been stopped from doing throughout this pandemic, en masse. And on this note, I want to end by saying that it is so clear that youth want to be part of the conversation and part of the action. But while spaces in forums like these do make their voices and ideas heard, they're often downplayed when it comes down to it. Their ideas are too bold, too big, too unrealistic, but we have a global emergency that we're in and ahead of us. So it's high time to break with business as usual. And in this matter, I strongly believe that developed economies, which in the grand scheme of things have fared relatively well in terms of their COVID-19 recovery, must lead the way together with international financial institutions. And by that, I mean that they must prioritize these policies and offer greater support to developing countries through fair partnerships, technology and knowledge transfer, and targeted investments to help them recover better. And by doing so, they choose solidarity over austerity. And I think that's very important. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendela, for those very, very important points. I think they're pertinent, and even though you said they're not your personal, perspectives, the way you speak to them, I think you really connect with most of them because it makes sense. Perhaps eventually you could share with us all the links to this report from the consultations that were undertaken, because I think it's really very, very important. But I took so with that said, I think we've completed the direct questions that were reserved for this session. I'd like to find out if we have any questions coming in from the chat box, or if anyone online wants to ask a question, specific question with regards to what was just said by our four panelists. You have the floor if you want to ask a specific question. Please don't be shy. If you have a question, please do ask. Okay, no questions. Maybe because we don't have so many persons online. That's totally fine. If there are no questions coming in, I have a number of follow-up questions just to help us have a better understanding of this very, very, very important topic for young persons today. My first follow-up question will go to Shade. Shade, you talked about an enabling environment, the importance of an enabling environment to ensure that young persons, especially the most marginalized, are being brought on board, are being included in policies and programs and opportunities. What for you today constitutes the content of an enabling environment? And is this enabling environment something that is static, has always existed over time, or does the enabling environment tend to be dynamic?
Thank you. Well, I want to take this opportunity. I think that Wendela and Regina in particular, they've raised some very important points that go towards, the vision of an enabling environment. I think in that respect, I want to build on what they said to reiterate the need for serious consideration of things like intersectionality if we hope to create a genuinely youth inclusive growth, as well as the need for financial literacy as a foundation for financial inclusion and empowerment. And those things all go towards creating an enabling environment. However, I want to take the discussion a step further in order to make two major contributions. And I do so deliberately from the perspective of a young Black woman from a small island developing state that's internationally recognized as economically and environmentally vulnerable. And for this reason, I prefer to speak in terms of development rather than simply economic growth, because my particular worldview has impressed on me that economies ought not to be discussed in isolation from the societies to which they relate. And having said that, youth inclusive development must necessarily be participatory and sustainable. And in this context, I want to add, firstly, that the way we work and the way we're willing to produce contributions to development has changed. It's not what it used to be, further to your question. Gone are the days where there's a 9 to 5 and you're working from offices and there's this linear approach that's focused on inputs. We now more than ever are willing and able to work from anywhere in the world at any time. We're focused on outputs, on sharing ideas and leveraging collaborative technologies. This change is youth driven. So if we harness that and we facilitate it and we encourage it, it must necessarily translate into more youth inclusive productivity, more youth inclusive growth, more youth inclusive development. And this is especially true of places like Barbados, where we must lean towards scalable, digital, and service-oriented industries based on our particular resource profile. My second point would be that, quite frankly, we can't develop a country or a region that's no longer there. So considering that we're roughly 10 years away from irreparable damage to our environment, with rising sea levels threatening small island developing states in particular, we need to build future-proof economic and social strategies premised on resource efficiency and circular production. And by that, I mean responsible development around the world by both typical policymakers in the global north, further to Wendela's point, but as well as policy takers in the global south. And to be clear, when we're talking about what I'm talking about is conceptually quite simple. You know, we're talking about resource efficiency, which simply means using the Earth's limited resources in a sustainable manner while minimizing impacts on the environment. And once resource efficiency measures are put in place, then a circular economy can be systemicized. I have a couple more points to make, but I'll stop there so as not to dominate the discussion.
All right, thank you very much. I mean, it's really pertinent, resource efficiency, managing our resources, both for ourselves in this generation and for the generations to come. So they don't say, oh, those people used all of the resources and left us a more difficult world. So it's all about the new technologies, energy efficiency, etc. And for small island developing states, it's really a crucial issue. We can't stress that enough. You mentioned some points linked to technology as well, maximizing the use of technology to improve lives. So this would drive me to a follow-up question addressed to Regina. Regina, you talked about financial inclusion for the most vulnerable. We've seen a lot of solutions coming up today, a lot of fintech, crowdfunding, etc. How do we put order in this space, especially with the emergence of blockchain technologies going in every direction? How do we put in place a system that works, fintech system that works? Do you have any good examples in mind, or do you have any criteria for a good, scalable, and really inclusive fintech technology, which would not rather drive inequality? Because we're starting to be very, very scared about the increasing rates of Gini index in many countries around the world. Inequality seems to be increasing. Fintech technology is there for inclusion, but we're instead seeing the gaps widening. So what good examples of fintech do you know, which you would like to share with us and encourage? And what for you would be the criteria for good inclusive fintech for the young people? Over.
No, thank you so much for that question. And I think it brings up very valid points. As you mentioned, the fintech ecosystem is growing dramatically, and we have seen this in various regions of the world. Latin America is also known to be one of the leading fronts in this, as well as the UK, among other parts in Asia. And something that we've seen different is various fintechs around Africa are focusing more on mobile money, while fintechs in Latin America are focusing more on credit and other types of receiving money in order to produce better businesses and things like that. So I guess the most important thing is to create regulation that's open enough, innovative enough, that allows every different aspect of the fintech ecosystem to go inside. So there's actually an aspect called sandbox. It was created by the United Kingdom, and it allows the regulation a space to allow any type of fintech to come into the fintech like the financial ecosystem, and it gives them a license, like a temporary license, where they can come into a country, try out their fintech service or product. If it works, they receive the official license, and if it doesn't, there are ways to mediate the risks and other types of consequences if there were any. And what is actually shown and what is proven is that it has been super beneficial. There's a lot of fintechs in this space that are addressing new ideas. And what they have in common is the less obstacles you have for people to come into financial inclusion, this meaning that credit. We've seen that the people in more impoverished nations or people who have lower economic standing, they can actually receive a better way to receive financial services and products. So if we allow poor people to come in, or not poor people, but people with less economic resources to come within the ecosystem, then they can actually come forward and have better ways of creating their lives, no? So the fintechs allows this. They allow for new ways to give people money without the need to have historical credit or these types of obstacles. And I think this is one of the way forward. And this within the regulation is ways to make it more flexible and more adaptable. So I guess the best way is, yes, allow all the fintech regulations to come forward, but through being flexible, through being adaptable, and to just allow anybody within these accesses, and also focusing on the aspect of, if it has a gender focus, promote it. If it has a gender focus, it has to have a gender focus, it has to have a climate focus, it has to have all of these different intersectionalities that we've been speaking. And that is the only way that this world is going to go forward in a more sustainable way, and with that youth economic growth at the end. I hope that was helpful.
Great, thank you for that answer. But permit me just stay a little bit with you, just a little bit, just to find out in the way you see the future and the sustainability of finance, inclusive finance. Do you think cryptocurrencies have a good place?
I think there is a way forward. It will depend on each country. There are some countries already in Latin America that are promoting Bitcoin, and they've made it part of their currency. So this is starting a trend, and I feel it could be the future. What governments are worried is the lack of regulation, or that it could get out of their hands, or it could be a way for people to wash like money, basically, lavado de dinero would be in Spanish. So this means that it's a different way. If you don't have a strong way to regulate it, then they'll be afraid that it's going to be like dirty money going into the system, or there's not enough credits to support it. But through technology, we have seen that there are ways and specific indicators for this to be prevented, and therefore allow for the Bitcoin ecosystem to flourish and continue. So definitely, I think it could happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that answer. It's really country specific, in fact. So we see how it goes within different countries across the years. So very quickly, since we're running towards the end, I'm going to come back to Christoph Ferguson with this question. You said something very interesting when you took the floor the first time. You talked about not really having a plan, just, that your mindset is that of just moving forward, this agility, flexibility.
Yeah, just go with the momentum.
Yeah, just going for it. But do you think that approach really is the best in today's current world, which is very shaking? Or do you think there's also need to have like a well-structured plan, well-structured vision, the way some institutions, which we young persons would like to engage with, who really set as a benchmark? Actually, what's your plan? What's your strategy, etc.? Yeah. What are you bringing to the table? So would you just say, oh, I'm just going to move in and see what comes up? And do you think you can be taken seriously that way and you can succeed? Or do you think there's a necessity to have this well-structured plan?
Well, one thing I would say COVID has taught me, and I'd say a lot of my entrepreneurship friends, is the key word everybody keeps talking about is pivoting. You know, how can you pivot from your initial business into something more profitable? Granted, a lot of businesses have closed down, they've lost customers, they've decreased on foot traffic, and they have to think of, innovative ways to keep afloat. So they either close one side of the company, or they start a new business model of the company, or a new product, or a new offering, depending on the demand of society and the marketplace. And this is to say that businesses have been successful in previous pandemics, and pandemics to come. It's just that how we can learn from history to say, hey, it's good to be adaptable, but at what point do you want to slow down and focus on something that, bringing the majority of the money or the profits? You get what I mean? But at the end of the day, it's really about being open-minded to adaptability, to change, to new things, to new technology, to new policies, to new anything, but also be, I was strict with your principles. Maybe your structure could mean how you run a business from a principle level, and it could mean that whether it is a 10-year company or a 20-year company, the principles are what keeps it traditional. For example, your principle could mean, say, hey, nobody's a liar in a company, always transparent, always being honest, are always sharing or being caring, and that could be a principle guiding on, compassion and leadership. But sometimes, at the end of the day, it's really about, at a business level, to be very open-minded. Listen to feedback. Maybe your structure is an old way of doing things that is no longer profitable, but you've known this way all your life. Opening your ears and eyes and to different possibilities now offers feedback, to refine your product, to refine your business, to refine what you're offering to the marketplace, and then you can get out and continuously improve on it, right? So for me, it's like a balancing act. When to adapt and when to pivot and when to change and experiment with new things. But on the other side, when to keep course and when to focus and when to say, hey, ignore the noise, focus and execute. Really? So, and that's really one of my favorite sayings from one of my mentors in Jamaica, Gordon Swaber, and he runs a tech company called Edifocal, and that's his mantra. Regardless of COVID, changing his platform, he's like, hey, no matter what, I'm ignore the noise, focusing and executing. Granted, he adapts to technology, posted online classes, maybe online field trips for students so they can do it on their own pleasure or pace. But it's just understanding that he's not changing his whole education model to go into the restaurant business, but he's changing how he runs the educational model to be more profitable, but also more impactful. So it's that balancing act, So you go with the momentum, you go with the experiments. I just trust the journey. That's all I could say.
Trust the journey. Thank you very much. Makes sense. So let's get the last point from Wengala. Wengala, can you tell us about your perspective about financing for development?
Sure, thank you. So I think in relation to what we have discussed today and the kind of policy and the type of action that we are advocating for, I think the financing for development framework is indispensable to that, because it is, for those who are not familiar, it originates from the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which is the outcome document from 2015 when the Sustainable Development Goals were agreed on. So it essentially provides a global framework with specific measures for how governments, financial institutions, private businesses should align their flows of finance and investment to accelerate progress on the challenges covered by the SDGs. And for that reason, finance for development is indispensable as a concept and as a blueprint to create these next generation economies that we've talked about today. And it's simply because it provides the foundation for the type and the quality of economic growth that we need, which under the SDGs prioritizes economic prosperity for youth, particularly SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. So, I mean, in the outcome document for financing for development, it explicitly references that there has to be investment in youth to achieve sustainable development. For example, national youth strategies to meet the needs and aspirations of young people, and that governments have to work with development banks, private actors to facilitate skills development training. As we said, you have to build from the ground up. You need to have skills, and you need to have the capacity to use, for example, the technology that is being transferred into developing regions. or else it becomes useless. And of course, implementing the Finance for Development framework requires more than just this one signed declaration. It requires the type of bold action by world leaders that we've talked about, and that they are held accountable if they do not. And I think that this is something that we have to be better at doing. And my wish is that the discussions that we've had at this forum and that the youth declaration that will be prepared becomes a catalyst for the serious change that youths around the world have been yearning for long before the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Wendela. We can't stress enough the importance of financing for development. You talked about the Addis Ababa Action Plan, which replaced the life, which was deemed inefficient. And that's just a really very important global agendas, global programs and visions that affect young people's lives every day. So it's very important for them to be coined with youth in mind, and by youth and for youth. So I think we have reached the end of the time allotted for us for this session. I really want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. You've been very, very resourceful, insightful. I am Youth Action Hub focal person for Cameroon, so I hope we would stay in contact within this network. It would have been great to have some of you in Geneva when we're back there physically before in 2018, before COVID-19 broke out. We wish we were in Barbados, holding each other, seeing each other physically, but COVID-19 won't let that happen. So we're just dealing with the online virtual session, just to say thank you really for your time, for your resources. I hope UNCTAD takes this inputs very seriously, codifies them in the youth declaration, and stimulate action from various levels, and that young people will really recognize themselves in what we've said here. So thank you very much, and I think we can break out from this session. Goodbye to all of you.
Welcome to Investing in Youth Businesses, Forging Pathways Toward a New Age Economy. My name is Yvonne Lang. I'm facilitating this session, and actually I'm calling you from Amsterdam today, where I work as a project officer at the Dutch bank ABN AMRO. What we're doing there is we try to accelerate the shift towards a more sustainable economy, and that is an economy that serves the well-being of people while respecting boundaries of our planet at the same time. And investing in business is essential to bring about this change. So today we're talking about, what about youth businesses? What are the challenges that young entrepreneurs face when trying to access finance? And of course, what are the solutions? So I will discuss this today with 4 excellent speakers. And I see that we're still missing one, so I hope you're not missing out on the 4th speaker. But let me introduce to you the first 3 speakers. We do have, first up, economist, entrepreneur, finance expert, and COO of the Ryan Group of Companies, Georgianne Ryan. Welcome. Then we do have Carlton Cummins, CTO and co-founder of Accelerant, which is a clean technology company that makes batteries better. And he is, mind you, one of the top 10 entrepreneurs of Barbados, as I read. Third up, we please welcome Vansh Madan, who is the founder of the, and I'm trying my best, Chadhari, and an SDG advocate and expert in the development sector at all levels of the government in India. So welcome, all the 3 of you. We do wait still for Kyle Maloney, who is the co-founder of Tech Beach Retreat and a digital marketeer who absolutely knows how to build a business because he already did it 5 times. And the way this works is we will actually have an informal chat with all of the speakers. I've prepared some questions that I will ask to you, and then there's also room for questions from the audience. So if you hear us and if you see us, then you can ask some questions in the chat. Please also refer to the speakers so we know who to ask the questions to. And yeah, I'm trying to fit them all in. So without further ado, let me give the floor to our first speaker, Georgianne. Hi there. You could unmute yourself. I have a question. what would you say? Why do investors put their money in young entrepreneur or in a youth-led business, and how does it actually work?
So thank you for having me, by the way. It's great to be here. I think it depends on the investor. You have different types of investors, whether they be sort of like capital injection sites like banks, or whether they be kind of personal investors, angel investors, and people who genuinely either believe in the company, believe in its founding and executive team, or people who believe in the idea of investing in a product that will bring things forward, like social impact investors. And so, depending on the investor, there are different incentives, like including profit and beyond that, for investing in youth entrepreneurs. Youth entrepreneurs, particularly in the Caribbean, I find, because of the relative lack of capital or the scarcity of capital, they tend to be really intuitive and just really savvy in leveraging social media and online tools to increase their brand awareness locally and regionally. And so a lot of investors are really heartened to invest in youth entrepreneurs because of this reasons. In my own interactions in Antigua, have been really happy to see young entrepreneurs thrive in the fields of art and retail and food service. And they are realizing that in this economy, it's not enough to be there and skilled, but you need to step up when it comes to PR professionalism to set yourself apart. I think also when it comes to youth entrepreneurs, because of sort of like the education trajectory of a lot of Caribbean islands, youth entrepreneurs are much more likely to be sort of like educated, not only in the classical sense of having a bachelor's and master's degree, but having much more exposure to the broader world through the internet, through social media, through other avenues. I think that the difficulty for investors right now is basically the information asymmetry, whether it be a banker or a individual investor. There's not a lot of knowledge about basically how much risk you're taking on. Yeah. And so there's a lot of reticence to invest in youth entrepreneurs because they don't have a credit history. A lot of them do not have collateral. A lot of them themselves, particularly if they're like paying off student loans or whatever they're doing, don't really have enough money to secure their dream or secure their business. And so I think even though there's a lot of appetite for youth entrepreneurs, the risk is what really holds a lot of investors back.
Okay. Would you say that the side of angel investors would be more promising because you kind of can tell your story? Maybe you can, like have like more informal contact with investor compared to more formal investing like a bank?
Yeah, particularly because a lot of banks in the Caribbean, we have indigenous banks. Like a lot of banks have, like they have like Royal Bank of Canada, they have Caribbean Union Bank in Antigua, but then we also have like First Caribbean International Bank, which is a huge multinational bank. And so they often would be more rigid because for them, it's not about who you are. It's not about like quote unquote supporting the economy. It's about how much money can they lose if you're a bad investment. Whereas with angel investors, I think there's a little bit more wiggle room. A lot of them do not have, for example, the rigid sort of impact evaluation that they have to go through personally to see whether or not you're a good investment. But with that, I think that a lot of them, even still because it's their own personal funds, would be a lot more cautious because for them, it's an opportunity cost. It's I invested in you, I can't invest in somebody else. And so if you do not give the results that I believe that I need, then someone else lost the opportunity. But on the plus side, a lot of them are ideologically aligned. And so if you have a business that is particularly in their wheelhouse, your statistical chance of failure is a lot less because they're really willing to take you on and give more than just investment of money, but time and intelligence as well.
Yeah. And I know that you're working in best practices. And I'm super interested in that, of course. We have to talk about best practices as well and what's already going on. How do you think what needs to change to actually make access to funding easier? What system has to change, and how, especially those entrepreneurs who are working in the digital economy, how are you looking at that?
I think it's mostly a mixture of society, culture, and policy questions. So, for example, in my work in the US in like economic policy and anti-poverty policy, we have found that, when you have basically cash-based assistance, whether it's in Kenya through like trials by Give Directly, or like in the US with the recent stimulus packages. If you give people sort of like tax rebates or cash back or some kind of guaranteed income, the money, majority of the times, you know, like they may buy some wine to celebrate, but the majority of the money goes towards either like reinvestment in yourself and your community. So whether that be if you're someone who's used to cooking in the informal economy, then you have this influx of cash and you decide, okay, well, I'm going to use this money to open up a cook shop or something that is a bit more legitimized and can increase my capacity for business. So I think that that's the policy question, like the anti-poverty policy, and the actual thing of fixing poverty and like the way in which that kind of stymies economic development. But then there's also the better business practices, like how difficult it is to register your business, how difficult it can be to access what you need to have a trademark for your business name, how difficult it can be to just even know where you start, what office you go to. Particularly in the Caribbean, a lot of our governments don't have really good websites, so you have to be dependent on physically walking into the office of whatever government entity it is. And so I think a lot of work has to be done when it comes to like access to capital, but also in kind of like the social and policy realm of looking at just kind of like the inefficiencies that particularly young entrepreneurs who may not have the sort of like church community where they happen to go to church with the person who is like the head of whatever department they need to get their permit quickly. Like people who are young do not often have access to those, and by depending on those kind of informal relations, what you're ending up doing is perpetuating the inequality that gets people to that place in the first place.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting. I hope we can get back to that point later. For now, I would like to move to Carlton. Carlton, are you there? Because I can't see you and I can't hear you. But yes, yeah, you're turning it on right now. Carlton, I know that you're running a tech company. How do investors look at potentially putting their money in this sector, and how is that different to, for example, real estate or agricultural sector?
Yeah, technology companies and technology businesses. Just checking first that you're hearing me very well.
Yeah. Yes, we're hearing you well.
Perfect. I always like to check my technology first. With technology businesses, the way investment decisions are made is quite different. There's a lot of discussion around growth trajectory, not necessarily based on revenue multiples, jargon. It's less about how big an impact your company could have within an industry than how much money you will make year on year, or how much money you seem to be making right now. You know, it's what's the big idea and what's the big opportunity with that big idea. So when it comes to that, particularly when it relates to the Caribbean market, it's very important that entrepreneurs, if you want to get into technology, that you think on a large scale, you think on a global scale. I often would have mentorship conversations with guys in Barbados when I'm in Barbados. And that's one of the things I always try to highlight. If you want to participate in the technology industry, you have to think big, because the type of investment you need, the amount of capital that's often involved in technology investment, you need to be thinking on a large enough, long enough time scale that people can see a return on investment. Typically is like 10x, so 10 times what they put in. If you're in an American market, I think the European market, they maybe be happy anything from 5 to 10 times what they've invested, because that's actually how they see your idea. Is this idea big enough that I can make 10 times what I made back from it? So when you start thinking of it like that, am I pitching something with a trajectory to it that is of that scale, which is interesting, because you will hear them and sometimes the guys will say, well, I told them about this solution that would solve a big problem in Barbados. Cool. Is it applicable any other parts of the world? Well, yeah, but you know, exactly. But they just haven't thought about it like that. They're thinking of it within their microcosm. And if I use a little bit of Barbadian slang, if you want big money, you gotta bring big ideas. Like that's actually what you need to do. You have to bring an idea that has the scope and scale to attract the funding, because they're not looking at just what you're talking about them today. They're looking at the potential.
Yeah. Is that something that you learned by experience? Like, did you think not big enough in the first place?
Well, it's a good question. So I moved to London, and one of the things I got involved in when I was a student there was a lot of student entrepreneur competitions. Different discussion, but I think student competitions is very healthy for young entrepreneurs to get a good feel for how people perceive what they say. It helps you to train your narrative, and that narrative is really important. Separate discussion, but one thing it taught me is that you do need to present an idea at a scale that appeals to the type of investment you're pursuing. If you're looking at angel investment, you can probably appease angel investors with a solution to a problem that they feel strongly about personally.
Okay.
But if you're talking about a big tech business and you have a feel that you're going to need, capital in the millions of dollars, I make batteries. Batteries are really expensive.
Yeah.
So, millions of dollars of investment, you have to think not just about where you will be in the next 2 years, 3 years. You have to think about what
for the future, where we have to look and adapt and be curious, because we have a lot of power in our hands. We just
I think there's something going wrong in our call.
Kamala. And two of the things which really stood out to me is the fact that you mentioned using local resources on one hand to make maximum use of that. So I think that's outstanding. But also ensuring that young people.
Yes, I think we should just continue with our call. What do you think?
The funny thing is that was Kyle, who we can't find. So we know Kyle is in the ether, and he is contributing. So all is well. But that was just my point. I'll try to summarize it like that. Thinking on a scale that reflects the type of investment you're trying to attract is important.
Okay, but here comes my challenge. You are busy with the sustainable business, with establishing clean technology, so you're trying to contribute to a more sustainable world, right? And at the same time, I think the whole return on investment, getting 10 times back what you invested yourself is like the most unsustainable thing that you can think of. Like, how do you think as an entrepreneur about maintaining the system that's actually wrong?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and we do have a little bit of crossroads with some investors. So you have your conventional venture capital firms, which they see themselves as the managers of a pot of money where they want to make a certain amount of return. We are seeing a shift in the people who invest in them, pension funds, etc., who their end customers want to know that their money is being used for some good. So it's becoming just as important for the startups and the young entrepreneurs, not just to highlight the monetary value and impact that they provide, but also to start talking about some of that social capital, some of the things that they address and solve in the world. It's only in being able to bring up that information and have that conversation that they're able to find out how to translate that into value from their side of the world. I will say there's a tool that UNDP has introduced recently, the SDGs, that's becoming a really useful mechanism to help different areas speak a common language. We've got some sustainable development goals that we need to achieve globally. Regardless of how much money we make, we kind of need these to continue to live. Here is how my company contributes to these SDGs in our part of the world. So as an entrepreneur, that's how you bring that sustainability and impact conversation into the forum with respect to these types of guys.
Yeah, so what you're actually saying is right now it's still a conversation that you need to have with your investors, whereas at the same time the old system is still in place, so you can't really move around that yet.
Well, the saying, big ships turn slowly. So we know they're trying to turn. It's just they can only turn at a certain pace. And our job is to help them make that turn as well. We're almost like the tugboats that are trying to help with that navigation. Nobody wants to get stuck in the canal. It's just we just need to help them navigate through it. But we can only do that if we can speak a language that we both understand. And that's often where you get the difficulty. And I think the UNDP, so the Sustainable Development Goals, have actually done a really good job in doing that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much also for that bridge, because that actually brings me directly to Vanch, who is an SDG advocate. I would like to ask you a question as well, and then I think we can enter into a discussion with the four of us, and we can check out if there are any questions. I think that I was wondering if, listening to what the others are saying about investment and the different types of investors, do you see also a role for other stakeholders than traditional investors to support youth-led businesses?
Yes, definitely. There is always a room for the people who are not into investing into youth-led businesses other than the traditional investors, definitely, because and for this also, we also need to be very clear what do we consider as a return on investment, because most of the people consider profit in terms of money, but what we also need to see through the lens of sustainability and through the lens of preserving our community and the earth, that not all money should be a profit. We should also take profit from what we are achieving and how we are making our earth and planet more sustainable. And one way to do that is by achieving the sustainable development goals. And if we consider them as the profit, we will definitely be able to, and a lot of people, I mean, will be definitely be able to invest in youth-led businesses, because it's from my personal experience, youth-led businesses thrive more on the idea than on the money. They are more keen to create social impact. They're more keen to work with the people who do not have access to a lot of resources, and we can probably help them with our skills and knowledge and bring them to a higher pedestal where they can actually promote themselves. So
Yeah.
from a personal experience where I've worked in a local community where a group of women, they are known as self-help groups in India. There are a small group of women who pull in a small amount of money just to finance one single business, but they don't have a market for that business. So for example, when I was working on ground in a community in my city, there was this group of women who were creating shampoo. And it was not just an ordinary shampoo, it was a herbal shampoo which was being produced with all these flowers and natural products. And we all know what is the demand of natural products in today's time when we are all dealing with all the artificial and preservative things. So that one thing clicked me a lot, that the people are working on ground to create more natural products, but they're not getting the market that they deserve. They're not able to get to that platform that they deserve. So we as the youth leaders can give them the desired platform, the skills that they can reach out to the market, reach out to a larger public, and then put in their efforts and put in their goods to a larger public to earn more profit. So this way you will also bring in more players in the economy, and plus you will also be motivating such people who are working in these villages or in small towns to boost up their own businesses. So that's why my point ends up with that the profit should not be only seen in terms of money, it should also be seen in uplifting the community and creating more impact.
Yeah, I'll just, while you were mentioning this, I'll just have like on a practical note, I just received a message that people can probably not see us. I do not know how to fix this technical issue. So I hope people can hear us at least.
I think that's more important.
This discussion, but I just thought that I should let you know about this technical issue. I also had a second question for you about public institutions. How do you think they could help getting out of this whole situation and bring forward some mindset change?
Well, I believe the public institutions have the most crucial role to play. Because they have the funding which cannot match any other investor or venture capitalist, because obviously public institutions are run by the state and state has a lot of money, but it's their priority where they choose to invest. But it's also a matter of how they choose to invest, the process in which they choose to invest. For example, in India, there is a scheme which is called Startup India, which promotes young business entrepreneurs to boost their idea and to give them a very small seed funding. So even that small seed funding may not be enough to run the business, but it gives you the will and it empowers you to continue the business, because we all know that how difficult, as Karl was talking about, to crack the funding to get money from the venture capitalists. But how public institutions can play, they can do it they can do it in a very different way, because they can do it in quite numbers. They can sponsor a lot of youth-led businesses. They can roll out different incentive schemes for them. For example, there are low interest loans that are given to the youth-led businesses in order to pursue their dreams and bring out some profitable products, because At the end of the day, every product is judged by the society. Every product is marketed in the society just to earn profit. So in order to earn that, product link incentives can be given, and a lot of such things can only be done by the public institutions because of the vast ambit of power they have, the vast ambit of funds they have, and the vast ambit of people they have, because the formation of a public institution is done in such a way that it aims to help the public at large. And I think that is the ultimate purpose of the public institutions as well. So yes, public institutions can do a lot when it comes to promoting youth-led businesses, starting right from the planning to acknowledging and to even give the funding. And moreover, when it goes to higher stage, these young startups, these young businesses are often acquired by these public institutions, which also gives the boost to the economy. So one such example in India can be that a lot of banks which were open privately were occupied by the government banks or the public institutions, just to make them more stable, just to make them more profitable, because a strong public institution, if it is backing a young youth-led business, it will definitely add to its credibility, and it will definitely bring up the new skills and the new talent that is being run in the society. So that's why the role of public institutions is very crucial in youth-led businesses.
And do you think that there is a limit to funding? Because I just heard Carlton say that you have to think big, like very big. Like, how is that with the public institutions? Like, can they even do that?
I'm sure they can, but they do have a lot of limitations to that. They cannot do it for everyone. But yes, I believe that they can do to a large number of people and to a large number of businesses than a usual venture capitalist or any angel investor.
Yeah. Georgianne, how are you listening to what Vance just said?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and the India context is also very interesting, because I have worked in small nonprofits in India, such as Vision Spring and BRAC in Bangladesh, and I think it's a really interesting basically the idea of classical cultural small manufacturing, whether it be using informal networks to elevate what was formerly sort of more rural things like small handicrafts and soap, and also really institutionalizing it. So these big NGOs giving a platform to people who otherwise would have a really small market. In the Caribbean, I think that's really easily translatable, particularly because we do have such a rich culture of handicrafts and things like that, that oftentimes I think we take for granted. But when it comes to things like tourism or international markets, being able to say, okay, well, I am in New York, I miss my local hot sauce. How can I access it without paying $1 million on Amazon or something like that? Because everything's on Amazon, but you don't always want to shop there. What are the ways in which we can sort of elevate what we see as kind of our local delicacies, and give them a platform? I think some countries do that much better than others, and it is a way to sort of leverage markets that are maybe not as sort of prized, such as technology or medicine or media, and definitely give a sort of equilibrium to all of the markets.
Yeah. And they're not as heavy in investing in the first place. That is something that we learned from the example of Carlton, and probably it also counts for different industries as well, that you have to make really big investments in the beginning. That is probably really something challenging for youth-led businesses. Or do you think differently about that?
I think particularly when it comes to, because a lot of times they use raw materials or they use natural skills, and so it is a much easier lift.
Yeah, Carlton, you're raising your hand. It's really
politely,
really polite of you.
I want to put an asterisk on my comment about thinking big and big capital. That does apply specifically to businesses that do need that high capital injection to get going. They usually call it a high barrier to entry. If you need to set up a factory or you need to do a lot of research, that doesn't apply to all business ideas. And some people can, and if you can, you should take an incremental approach if you can. So if you can start with something that you can manage with your own capital or with a loan, or even, you know, with some family, friends and funding, and you snowball and snowball from there, absolutely should. But you also have to be cognizant if your business isn't like that. And often the keys to help you determine that would be, what's the pace of the industry that I'm trying to get in? Is it something that seems to be peaking at a certain point and I need to get on the train? Or is it more of a trend that I need to make sure I make my mark at a specific time? Then you probably need the capital injection, because it's almost like missing the bus kind of thing. Whereas if it's a nascent opportunity that you bring something unique to, and, you know, like a special hot sauce, really simple example, but there are millions of different versions of this, where you have that time to bring that thing that you uniquely bring to the table, then you have that opportunity to organically or incrementally build. Be very careful not to seek capital if your business doesn't need it.
Yeah. Wow, I'm already warning you guys. The last question I'm gonna ask you is to give our viewers a tip and something that you would have loved to know when you embarked on your own entrepreneurial adventure. But I think this one, Carlton, I was coming really close, like not lending any money that you actually don't need is, I think, a good idea. I wanted to talk to you a little bit, to all of you, a little bit about the big hurdle of not having a track record. When you're starting your business, like I'm working at the bank, and I think Georgianne also mentioned risk earlier. We always look at the proven track record, and I'm at the part of the bank where we try to change the system, but we are not there yet. So for the time being, it's looking in the past and trying to see and assess how a company has performed before. But naturally, that is impossible for youth-led businesses because they haven't been a business before. How did you guys overcome this challenge? Do you have any tips? Any of you? Maybe I start with Benj.
Sorry, I couldn't catch your voice. The voice. Could you please repeat if you don't mind?
I'll repeat my question in the chat, and maybe
yeah, you're audible now. You're audible now.
Yeah, awesome. So my question is, how do you overcome the challenge of not having a track record when you're just starting in business?
I think when you're starting your business, the most important thing is your passion and the perseverance. If you are really into what you are doing, I think even if you're not getting any profit out of it, you will still continue to do it, because at the end of the day, it gives you a satisfaction that you've achieved something. It might not be in money, as I told you again. It's not always about the money. It's not always about the profit in monetary terms. It's also about the profit in terms of society, how you have helped society and how you have helped as an ideal citizen of being a country, how you have contributed to the society. Because when we are living in a country, in a free world, in a democratic nation, it becomes our responsibility to give it back to the society, regardless of what we do and how we do. So that is one satisfaction that can initially keep you going in the beginning, when you don't have a lot of monetary returns to expect, or not a lot of achievements to expect in the initially. So that one thing that keeps you going is the passion and the satisfaction from the society that comes, or even a simple thank you for our people, from person in the community when you help them achieve something. That can make your day and that can keep you going. And that's very important in the initial phase, that you don't stop, you continue what you're doing and you never give up. So that's one thing that I have learned throughout my experiences, that in the initial phase you might not earn money, you will end up in even losses, but you will be satisfied and you will continue to work and strive for it and achieve it one day.
That is very optimistic. Thank you. Georgianne, Carlton, would you like to react on that?
Yeah, I can probably go second on it. Building a track record, I would kind of echo some of what was said. One of the key things, there is a positive to not having a track record as well. It means that you have carte blanche. You can create your own narrative. There's no precedence that exists for you before. So it gives you a grand opportunity to create a really good narrative for yourself. This is where I think that demonstrating enthusiasm is really important. I would probably synthesize it as demonstrating ability. People often think that the only way you demonstrate ability is by having money and spending it. That's actually the last thing you do. There's so much planning, there's so much communication, there's so much ideation that's needed before that, and that's really what is important. Anybody can spend money. Fact. There's a subset of people who can spend and demonstrate that they can spend money well. A really simple thing that does not cost you any money to do that is how you communicate your idea. Having the ability to articulate your idea very well, respond to some of the key questions that people would have to it, and even be able to present some solutions that people may not have thought about, but you demonstrated that you've thought about your idea. That builds confidence. It may not build confidence from a bank's perspective, but an angel investor starts to see an interest in that. A bank starts to pay interest in an angel investor's investment, and you see how you build momentum from there. However, if you're trying to fund the money without having an articulate idea, you've kind of put the cart before the horse, have you? You actually need to be able to articulate what you're doing and why you're trying to do it and how you're going to go doing that well before you should even be looking for money. You do need to know how much money you need. That's a great idea. But you do need to be able to understand the language that the different institutions speak. That's a great idea as well. But you can see none of that involves you being able to spend money. That's you understanding and building a narrative and really developing the know-how and expertise with the industry you seek to pursue.
Yeah, and I think especially if you do talk about bigger projects like you're involved, Carlton, from my bank's perspective, a trend that I see recently happening a lot in Europe is that there are also co-financing projects of different investors. So everyone takes like a fair share of the risk. I think that could also be an interesting future perspective for youth-led businesses. I was just thinking about that, but I was also wondering, Georgianne, how are you looking at the whole track record thing?
Yeah, and I think a track record, like for me, particularly in the Caribbean, where it's like a very resource scarce environment when it comes to capital, what Carlton said about crafting a narrative is really important. I think that's actually something that I find all of youth entrepreneurs are much better at because they learn from the mistakes of those that have come before us. We don't have the decades-long legacy of some of the bigger organizations or bigger companies in our home countries. And even if we take on a company that already exists at a high level, there is still a level of, okay, well, show us what you can do. And if you come in and you're meek and you're timid and you don't really know what you want to do, that is even a bigger minus to your credibility than even if you had all of the money to execute what you want to do. Because at the end of the day, it's about convincing people to become stakeholders in your vision and being able to clearly communicate what is your theory of change. So particularly in like the nonprofit and the angel investing world and even the policy world, a lot of the terms you throw around are like theory of change and theory of action. Your business, well, the theory of change is sort of like your Overton window, your mission, the thing that in God's green earth, like if you get everything that you want to do, what is the thing that your business can achieve? And what is the thing that it can change about your sector, your country, your environment? The theory of action is the steps that you take to basically make that theory of change possible. Mm-hmm. And so being able to have a business plan or have an elevator pitch that cogently says not only how the business that you're creating is going to contribute to that theory of change, but even how a business that you're taking on as a second or third generation, how you are different from your predecessors. That's also incredibly important because at the end of the day, in a society where capital is scarce and memories are long, you do need to be able to either get yourself, if not a history, then at least some presence in the industry in which you're aiming to enter.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting point you're making because you're also looking at cultural differences. Not everyone who starts a business starts it actually from the scratch. And I think if you are looking back to family business history, then you might do things very differently, and I think that can go both ways. So maybe your business actually has a track record, but it's not really working in favor for you. So I think that is something to add to the discussion. Is really valid. Thank you so much. I'm already looking at the clock, and I see that we have to wrap up. I could talk for hours actually about this, because you triggered me for another question. Maybe before we end, Vansh, did you want to say something? Because I saw that you took the floor.
No. I'm okay. I'm okay.
Okay.
I think we have definitely gone beyond that restricted time.
Awesome. So I saw a lot of things happening in this call. I think that we do have to focus on a narrative that can definitely beat the track record. At the same time, it's also maybe a little bit more about personalization, to try, if you are a young entrepreneur or if you're a youth-led business, that you have to make sure that somebody hears your story and believes in you and your abilities. That probably counts a little bit more even than something that you can show on paper or a really good business plan. So I hope that movements like crowdfunding and microcredits and other informal types of investments are also something that probably help young entrepreneurs to, and also the way that we are connected probably also helps, because today I was talking to a microfinance agency that are based in the Netherlands, but they're actually from the US. So that probably helps as well. And before we stop, I already announced it. I would like to hear all of the three of you to give one final tip to a young entrepreneur. What would you suggest that they should do? And I start with Bench.
Okay, so just from my side is whenever you from my side it'll be just Kyle is here finally.
Kyle, you're here. We have to hear your tip as well.
Yeah, sorry. So I'll just complete my part. So yeah, from my side, a small tip would be to just be focused on the impact that you're trying to create and the result that you're trying to achieve. But the only thing I would not recommend anyone is to ever give up. Please be determined on what you believe, because that is something which will take you miles in your life and also create impact in the lives of other people, which I believe is one of the most important things in our life.
Thank you, Kyle. I just asked the others to give one final tip to a young entrepreneur when it comes to financing. So you can think of that for a second, and then I go to Georgianne to answer the question first.
Yeah, I think my tip would be to invest in relationships and clusters. Classically, in economics, clusters have been a really good way for businesses, regardless of the industry, whether it be similar companies or symbiotic companies, to leverage a lot of intelligence and capital and co-leadership. And so I would really encourage youth entrepreneurs to, yes, there's some competition involved, particularly when capital is scarce, but to also try to have a collaborative spirit with other entrepreneurs in your space, and you never know how those relationships will end up serving you, whether you are a retail business who happens to know a marketing business from your interactions, and so you're able to grow with each other and become each other's customer, and that's really how you change a business environment and an economy.
Thank you. Kyle, do you have already any idea, or shall I ask Carlton first?
Yeah, go to Carlton. Carlton always has some really good ideas, man.
Okay, here we go.
Ideas central.
A long time no see, Kyle. We could probably have a whole separate conversation just by ourselves. I tend to meet Kyle in such forums very often, so it's always a pleasure when we cross paths. Mm-hmm. That said, my advice would be really simple. Just start with a willingness to learn. I mean, the truth is, and you don't realize it when you're a young entrepreneur, nobody in their room is expecting you to know everything. So you just go in and you learn as much as you can, and you do as well as you can until you know better. And when you know better, you do better. Sometimes we wait until we think we've got everything figured out to start. By then, we've often missed the opportunity. So it's usually just better to just start. The outcome you may get may not be what you've had in mind, but it's far better than the outcome if you hadn't done anything at all. My company, we pivoted and adjusted and transformed ourselves over the years simply because we've started and we've listened to what people had to say. We've realized what the market wants, and we've kind of evolved and adjusted to suit. But you can only do that if you start.
Yeah, thank you. Famous last words for Kyle.
Yeah. So the question is on entrepreneurs and young people getting finance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of really to underscore Carlton's statement. And I'm happy he went before me because we kind of tend to align in our thinking. A lot of the things that he says, I'm usually like, yeah, this guy's taking words right out of my mouth. Because one thing I remember like very clearly when I just started out building my first company, and I was in university, and one of my friends, he has an older brother, and he was already like doing investing, and he was on his like second company. He had 2 companies running, and he was like so about it, like making things happen, right? And I was an engineer studying aerospace engineering, and I was so happy to come home for summer and play some video games, play some PS4 with my friends or whatever, and not like think about work. And he comes in and he's like, what are you guys doing, me and my friends, right? We're like, well, we're playing games. Clearly, we don't want to think about work anymore. He's like, so when do you want to actually start your business? We're like, oh, when we graduate, we'll take a job and we'll eventually like start working for somebody. We'll save up some money, then we'll start. He was like, that is too far. He's like, you need to start making mistakes now. Get it out of your system, you know? He's like, here are some books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Think and Grow Rich. He started setting us some books. He's like, man, every idea that you can think of that you want to work on, list it out, then come up with a priority list and begin going after it now. Like, don't wait, because the learning that you're going to get when you begin now is going to compound, like compound interest and a good investment, you know? And over time, the amount that you would have ground that you would have covered in that time that you began when you were 16, 17, 18, 19 years old is going to compound, so that by the time you're like in your late 20s and your 30s, you would have had so much experience that you're coming in to your maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th company, and you're going to have so much more impact, and people within that space are going to be able to trust you so much more, you know? Yeah, so agreed.
Thank you so much. Wow, we haven't seen you much in this call, but I think with this last statement, you totally made up for everything that we wanted to ask you too. I have to wrap up now because we're only live for so long. But thank you so much. I saw everyone nodding while Kyle was speaking, so I kind of view that as an agreement that you should just start as a young person and try what is all possible without putting in a lot of money yet, and then just be really clever about where to get the money from, right? So thank you so much, and I hope to see all of you again. You're really impressive entrepreneurs, and this way we will probably make it towards the achievement of the SDGs. So thank you so much.